First, we've got to talk about climate, capital, and authoritarianism. The threat of climate change is international. And this is kind of a cliche at this point, but it's not a cliche when it's choking your lungs or flooding your city. And that's happening increasingly across the planet. Sydney, Australia is sort of enveloped with smoke and smog. Hospitals have seen a 25% spike in admissions due to poor breathing conditions in the city of Sydney. The smoke has come from the worst brush fire in the season in the area's history, coupled with a historic drought. And still, the Australian right-wing government, much like our own, refuses to address massive environmental catastrophe and continues to peddle climate denialism. But we need to prepare and fight two battles at once with the climate crisis. The global fascist movement, the authoritarian politics that are still so potent across the globe. Yes, you have your idiot moron versions of Donald Trump, of Jair Bolsonaro, of the regime in Australia that still talk about climate change as a conspiracy, whether or not it's Leonardo DiCaprio setting the Amazon on fire, as Bolsonaro floated recently, or Donald Trump's very persuasive theory that climate change is a Chinese hoax. We know that the next wave that we are going to see, whether or not it's in vigilante terrorism in the United States or more sophisticated populist forces in Europe, is to acknowledge the climate crisis and link it to a xenophobic far-right agenda. And that this politics, as always, will be facilitated, aided, and abetted by the failed neoliberal model that still is the prevailing model of global politics today. Eco-fascists use fear of scarcity to scapegoat immigrants and minorities. They use the rhetoric of environmental catastrophe to advocate for radical action on their own terms. Again, ethnostates, demonizing and targeting minorities and refugees, ecological and otherwise. Marine Le Pen's National Party in France has taken an environmental plank on after years of outright denial. They've done this by making their environmentalism hyper-local and linked to their prevailing xenophobic agenda. The AfD, fascist party in Germany, has taken a green stance. They've talked about better land management and animal rights while still denying the science of climate change. And again, linking climate with their fundamentally xenophobic agenda. It shouldn't be any surprise that its leaders are connected to the right-wing pro-fossil fuel think tanks like the European Institute for Climate and Energy and the U.S. Heartland Institute. Climate change is also being used by the right wing to oppose Chinese and African development. In the U.S., the environmental movement has a complicated past. The Sierra Club used to be virulently anti-immigrant, and many other groups are more interested in preserving country clubs and hunting grounds than opposing pollution globally. Now, we need to have an answer on all of these grounds. People do need community. There does need to be local dimensions of environmentalism. There does need to be a sense of independence and power over one's own lives that is connected with the ecological movement, that truly empowers people, that is antithetical to the far-right agenda and, of course, will never be recognized and facilitated by the neoliberal one. This is the type of work that Bruno Latour in Down to Earth gets to, of literally getting back down to earth out of these imagined globalization and anti-ecological projects. And the nationalist one is the same thing. It's another fantasy. It's another fantasy of retreat and barriers, unlike a fantasy of a globally managed neoliberal earth subsumed by human desires and always taking the back seat. Look at the plans put forward by Emmanuel Macron. His primary initiatives have been to tax middle-class consumption and has, of course, led rightly to the Yellow Vest movement. Look at Mike Bloomberg's authoritarian instincts and anti-poor policies. The Lib Dems in the UK always will prioritize protecting capital over any type of real green transition, as advocated by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. They oppose Labour's plans to nationalize railways, to radically reduce emissions through public action, and to provide a just transition for workers, which needs to be core and fundamental to any green initiative. Instead, the Lib Dems think that targeted taxes on consumption and a minimal increase in spending will curtail the crisis. Instead of targeting corporations and the system responsible, the Lib Dems expect the poor and working class to pay the cost, just as their corporate democratic friends and Macron in France expect as well. This is a disaster on the merits and the politics of how to address the climate crisis, and like everything else, is the handmaiden of the worst, most dangerous forces in global politics today. The two approaches are both wrong. The Green New Deal is the way forward. Both eco-fascism and capitalist environmentalism function to protect capitalism. Eco-fascism uses the crisis to attack immigrants, fortify borders, but not rein in capital. None of these are fundamentally anti-capitalist projects. Capitalist environmentalism attacks our individual habits instead of major corporations that dominate our entire political and economic process. A Green New Deal or Labor's Green Industrial Revolution have the necessary systemic approach to confront the climate and ecological crisis. Climate change is a systems problem, and without addressing that system that you've caused, you're just posturing or making the situation much, much worse. You guys have anything to add?
I think that
let's face it, just that brilliant.
That was incredible.
Smart as hell.
So
rundown
brilliant, so good.
That you're not gonna, frankly, see many other places.
Well, I mean,
all right, let's go to the pitch.
That's the thing, though, is that if we aren't able to win this debate, if we're not able to win this political solution, the right wing is going to be able to use it for very wicked ends. We're going to talk later about what happens when the right wing is able to take control over a crisis. And when you're talking about a crisis like the climate crisis, which is literally an existential life or death crisis for many people, it is a very worrying thing if the left is not able to win this battle, because the right can use this for devastating causes. And we're already seeing it. And it's very frightening, too, to see it start to percolate around like the radical right-wingers, the murderers, the thugs who are creating terror around the world. Like, they are citing ecological issues as a major motivation for them to act. And we should be taking it very seriously.
And this is another reason why this ridiculous framing of people need to accept the science is a dead end. I mean, look, of course it's a problem. And of course it needs to be pointed out that major corporations like Exxon and many others have funded systemic propaganda efforts, including inside the science itself, which is another reason why you should not just sort of blindly worship science. They have been able to enlist scientists to minimize the climate crisis, to engage in denialism, to protect their industry, which is a fundamental threat to the human prospect, right? So of course that matters. But that being said, everybody is going to accept facts or science and filter it through their own pre-existing biases and belief systems.
I really wanted to add, though, just on that, is that's a big problem that we've seen with this whole, like, the liberal fetishization of, like, Greta, for example.
Right.
And, I'm not coming after her, but I'm coming after all these liberals who for so long, they think that the only thing to do about climate change is just believe the science. Like, there's not been a radical plan to deal with the amount of damage that we're doing to our globe. It's just been like, oh, well, we believe the science and our opponents don't. That's it. And you're seeing it now where, like, liberals, instead of getting behind plans like the Green New Deal or supporting labor, they're wanting to put up murals of Greta, and celebrating her and turning her into a pop culture figure, which she isn't even asking for, by the way.
No, she's asking for action.
Like, please act. And instead, a lot of liberals for so long have thought that just because they believe in this scientific fact, that's good enough. And they're substituting that for the necessary political action that's going to need to happen.
Right. That's precisely right.
Sort of like our forthcoming conversation on dialectics.
Forthcoming, a think tank episode for patrons coming soon, entitled Machiavelli is Really Good, Though. And he is. The left needs spirituality and Machiavelli. Badly. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.